Welcome, everyone. I'm so glad that you can be here today. I just really appreciate all the press and folks showing up. It's a really important day, although we know that it's not going to change a whole lot in Idaho's case or our laws today. But today, the Supreme Court released its decision in the case of Mike Moyle v. United States, dismissing the case as improvidently granted. Specifically, Justice Barrett acknowledged that they should never have taken the case so prematurely, but had done so erroneously because they believe statements made by our Attorney General that turned out to be egregiously false, flagrant misrepresentations that if women were allowed emergency care, doctors would be forced against their will to do abortions, or that emergency rooms would become the enclaves of abortions. This case should never have gone to the Supreme Court in the first place. Today's ruling and the suffering of women and the exodus of doctors that preceded it happened only because of the Idaho GOP's relentless litigation asserting that women's health is not worthy of protection in medical emergencies. The ruling gives us the tiniest sliver of temporary relief, but gives us no genuine solution to the crisis that Republican legislators have unleashed upon women and doctors of Idaho. We're glad that at least for now, women suffering catastrophic health emergencies will not be airlifted out of state. But we have to ask, why did our Republican leaders work so hard to make this nightmare a reality? The deadly peril faced by pregnant women in Idaho in the wake of this ruling was deliberately orchestrated by Idaho's Republican politicians who were willing to gravely endanger pregnant women for their own political advantage. Certainly, the Supreme Court's decision to temporarily deny the most dangerous and cruel impulses of the Idaho GOP extremists is a small but welcome reprieve for women in Idaho. But we cannot continue to be ruled by politicians who have such unbridled contempt for women's well-being. This problem will only be solved at the ballot box. We call for voters in Idaho to come out this November in support of Democrats who respect medical profession and the safety of women. This battle's not over. We'll fight in the legislature, we'll fight on the campaign trail, and we'll fight at the ballot box.
I want to underscore just how inadequate the relief is that was granted by today's ruling. For now, Idaho must allow doctors to provide essential emergency abortion care to pregnant women when such care is necessary to avoid serious health damage. This applies only in an emergency room setting, and only in cases where there is immediate threat of serious bodily harm to the pregnant woman if she does not receive stabilizing abortion care. There is still no health exception in Idaho. There is no fatal fetal anomaly exception. There is no help for women facing a health crisis anywhere outside of a federally funded hospital emergency room. There is no actual bodily autonomy for women. There is still no workable rape exception, and there is no exception that even this slim emergency lifeline won't be cut in the near future. And the operative part of what I just said is for now. As Justice Jackson wrote in her dissent, the court has not adopted Idaho's far-fetched theories, but it has not rejected them either. Today's decision is not a victory for pregnant patients in Idaho, it is delay. Importantly, today's ruling will do nothing to stem the collapse of women's health care in Idaho that was triggered by Idaho's total abortion ban. Remember that for a year and a half after Roe was overturned, emergency care was available in Idaho under Judge Windmill's injunction. So we are essentially returning to where we were from June 2022 through January 2024, before the Supreme Court stayed Judge Windmill's injunction this January. During that time, during that year and a half period, when we still had emergency abortion care, we lost the majority of our high-risk pregnancy doctors, we lost a quarter of our OBGYNs, we saw 3 labor departments shut down, and we saw physician applications to come to Idaho plummet. This loss of skilled physicians is, of course, of great personal concern to me as the mother of a child who is only alive today because one of those high-risk pregnancy specialists was available, specialists who have been and will continue to be driven out of our state. No doctor is going to want to come here when they still face imprisonment for providing evidence-based care anywhere outside of an emergency room. And even that protection could be yanked at any time. In fact, our Attorney General and GOP leadership will continue to spare no expense to ensure that in the end, all emergency lifelines are cut to the women of Idaho. This litigation is far from over, and they will continue to hemorrhage our tax dollars in their conceived quest. But this minuscule window of temporary help that we got today doesn't come close to fixing the crisis that was created by Idaho's total abortion ban. But I do fear that my colleagues across the aisle will use this ruling as cover to once again punt on any legislative fix. We need a complete repeal of Idaho's monstrous total ban and a return to the successful and reasonable laws that we had on the books for decades under Roe, which did include, contrary to the misinformation that's put forth on the other side, it included a ban on late-term abortions except as medically necessary. There was never a time when you could get 8-month abortions in Idaho, pre-Roe or since. But it will be up to the voters. That is clear. From today, the courts will not save us. And certainly the current GOP supermajority who brought this crisis upon us will not save us. But I do want to underscore what my colleague, Senator Wintrow, mentioned, the outrageous conduct of the GOP leaders who have insisted on litigating to the highest court in the land for the sole purpose of endangering women who are suffering medical emergencies. The analogy I see, frankly, no analogy is perfect, but I see that they strapped the women of Idaho to the train tracks with an oncoming train and then spent millions of taxpayer dollars to fight anybody who tried to untie those women. Now, the Supreme Court just temporarily slowed the oncoming train, but the women of Idaho remain tied to the tracks, and our GOP politicians will stop at nothing to keep them there and to speed up the train that's heading toward them. Idaho's elected leaders should be working to help Idahoans, not strip them of critical emergency health care. And voters need to send that message loud and clear this November.
Exactly. So, appreciate that. So we'll just rotate
Yes.
with questions and kind of back and forth each other.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Ruth.
Representative Bell, I think you touched on this. Last session, Chairman Crane did not bring up any abortion legislation. He was very public about it. Did not do that because of the upcoming Supreme Court arguments in April. This is one of the Ninth Circuit, and then depending on what they do, it goes back to the. My point being, are you confident that the abortion fix, any kind of abortion legislation will be heard in 2025?
I see it as extremely unlikely. I think they're going to try to say, oh, look, we have this narrow sliver of temporary emergency relief, so we don't have to act. They wouldn't hear it before. If they wouldn't hear any health exception while women were being airlifted nearly weekly out of the state, they're certainly not going to hear one now, particularly when the GOP platform just tripled down on saying there can be no health exception. In fact, they don't even want a rape or incest exception, and they want to ban IVF. So in this climate, and what just happened in the Republican primaries with the defeat of a large number of more moderate Republicans, it's almost inconceivable that there's going to be any credible health exception brought forward this coming session. Hope I'm wrong, but if history and what I've experienced in this building is any lead, it's not happening. This is going to have to be done by voters.
I think, quite frankly, too, that EMTALA actually provided that small window of a health exception and death exception in the emergency room, and it's shocking that they fought that. So if they're fighting that, and then they're arguing nonsense in the Supreme Court, they're not going to, in my estimation, do anything to solve this problem for women going forward.
Yeah. More questions, Joe?
You visited with the HSS secretary yesterday. Were you able to get any assurances or plans moving forward on how they can help the situation here in Idaho?
Well, go ahead.
Well, I think they're certainly doing all they can, and I'm extremely grateful to the administration for bringing this case. We would not have even this sliver of help that we have under EMTALA if the Justice Department had not come in like lightning as soon as the Dobbs decision came down and said, hey, there's this federal law that's been on the books since 1986 that requires emergency care. You've got to allow emergency care. But for their intervention to that level, there would be no end to women being airlifted and hemorrhaging and, going with untreated sepsis and who knows what else. I think they would like to do everything in their power, but unfortunately, they're being hobbled by the courts at every turn. We have, unfortunately, the highest court of the land seems not very interested in riding to our rescue on this. This is, again, the most minimal thing they could have done. This is really a punt. It resolves nothing. We're going to be right back in the Supreme Court in a couple years, and they have offered absolutely no assurance that there's any long-term prospect for women getting emergency care in Idaho.
Yeah. I would like to say I was so pleased to have, seen our U.S. Health and Human Services Secretary in Idaho and many other states, because he is really advocating for what we are, that health care for all, that that abortion care is an important part of our health care, especially when we're in a crisis. Everyone has the fundamental right to decide when and if to have a child. At the very least, you should be able to get emergency care in a crisis that saves your life or preserves your health. So I was happy to see him on this trail, really uplifting that message and reminding everyone that we all have to stand firm for providing access for all Americans and Idahoans.
And it was reassuring that somebody in that position, in the highest spot in Health and Human Services, has a wife who is herself a high-risk pregnancy specialist. So this is somebody who brings a great deal of personal expertise and knowledge to the table. So I feel like we're in the best hands possible there. There's just a limit to the power that they have to save us from the folly of our own legislature.
As Representative Rubel said, the true power now lands in Idahoans' hands. And we've seen Idaho people take their state back from Idaho politicians that aren't listening over and over in the initiative process. So I hope to see, and I think that is the solution, that people will take matters into their own hands, because reasonable, down-to-earth people just want to live their lives free of the control and tyranny of this GOP that is just locking down all of our health care.
Yeah. There's a serious disconnect with the people of Idaho on this issue. I saw a very recent poll showing that 82% of Idahoans believe that there should be, at the very least, emergency abortion care. And yet we see our GOP supermajority sparing no expense to crack down and ensure that there is no emergency abortion care no matter what. So again, we're seeing, ironically, the numbers are the same. 82% of Idahoans wants one thing, and 82% of the legislature is delivering the exact opposite. This is a fundamental disconnect that can be rectified by the voters of the state of Idaho this November.
Now, last but not least, I want to say this Attorney General called these situations hypothetical and diminished doctors' credibility. And we have heard story over story of women who have struggled and basically been traumatized just trying to seek help and care for their pregnancies. There's nothing hypothetical about the women who are coming forward and who are suffering. That is the most important thing here. We have to stop this suffering. Sorry, other questions?
You mentioned a ballot initiative. What does an ideal citizen ballot initiative on this topic look like? Obviously, it would be for this November, but in the future election.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of very smart minds working on that. I don't know that anything's been finalized. Again, I think it would be very reasonable to return to something like what we had before Dobbs. I think there's a general consensus among the majority of Idahoans. Nobody wants, I think freely available late-term abortions. Those were banned before, and I think that would be something that everybody in Idaho could get behind, unless obviously there's a serious threat to the woman's life or health. But I think certainly having it be legal up to the point of fetal viability would be a very reasonable thing that I believe the majority of Idahoans would support, and would protect the safety of the women of Idaho, would protect their bodily autonomy, and would at least put us on the path to rebuilding the health infrastructure in Idaho that has been absolutely gutted in the past 2 years.
Yeah. Exactly. Any other questions?
Oh, it's such a juicy topic. There must be more questions.
Well,
I mean, one thing that I think is of note, it was really an interesting read. I'm sure you've all read the opinion, but it was quite breathtaking. And Senator Wintrow touched on this at the beginning. They basically admitted that they never should have taken this case, and that this whole case was taken prematurely and on false pretenses because they believed false representations made by the state of Idaho in its briefing. That Justice Barrett, who is no left-winger, basically acknowledged that they had been misled, and that all of the representations made by the state on which they relied in granting certiorari to this case turned out to be false. And that's really disappointing for the people of Idaho, that they are being falsely represented in court. And that led to 6 months of gross endangerment of the women in Idaho. That led to the essentially the banning of emergency abortion in Idaho for 6 months. So falsehoods told by our highest legal representative in the state led directly to women having to be airlifted out of state and endangered for 6 months. I think that's something the people of Idaho should know.
Yes.
Well, you guys, thank you.
Thank you.